They smile. They help. They say all the right things. And yet, behind every nice face, there is something they never show. Not because they are evil, but because they are human. Tonight, we're exposing the uncomfortable psychological truth most people deny. Niceness is not the absence of darkness. It's often the mask that hides it. From early childhood, many people learn that being nice is rewarded while expressing anger, disagreement, or selfish needs is punished or ignored. When a child realizes that approval, love, and safety come from being agreeable, the brain adapts. This is not morality developing, it is survival conditioning. Psychology explains this as behavioral reinforcement, where certain traits are strengthened because they reduce emotional or social threat. Over time, niceness becomes less of a choice and more of an automatic response designed to keep the person accepted and protected. As this pattern repeats, emotions that are labeled as bad begin to get pushed down. Anger toward parents, jealousy of peers, or selfish desires are not allowed space to exist openly. The brain does not delete these emotions because emotions are biologically wired responses. Instead, they are suppressed into the subconscious. Psychological studies on emotional suppression show that feelings pushed out of awareness remain active internally, influencing stress levels, thought patterns, and behavior without conscious control. This buried emotional content creates inner tension. On the surface, the person appears calm, polite, and kind, but internally there is conflict between what they feel and what they are allowed to express. Cognitive dissonance develops when the self-image of being nice clashes with natural human impulses. The mind resolves this not by eliminating impulses, but by hiding them deeper. This is where the psychological shadow forms, the part of the personality that contains everything unacceptable to the conscious identity. Over time, the stored emotions do not weaken, they intensify. Neuroscience research shows that suppressed anger and resentment increase physiological arousal, stress hormones, and emotional reactivity. This is why triggers that seem small to others can produce sudden emotional outbursts in very nice people. The reaction appears disproportionate, but psychologically, it is the release of accumulated, unprocessed emotion that has been waiting for an opening. The darkness here is not cruelty or evil intent. It is unacknowledged humanity. Anger, jealousy, and selfishness are natural psychological forces meant to signal boundaries, needs, and threats. When these signals are silenced in the name of niceness, they do not disappear, they transform into internal pressure. True psychological health does not come from being endlessly nice, but from recognizing these darker emotions, understanding them, and learning how to express them consciously, instead of letting them erupt unconsciously. Nice people are often praised for staying calm, patient, and understanding, but psychology shows that this calmness frequently comes from emotional suppression, rather than emotional health. Suppression happens when a person feels anger, hurt, or frustration, but consciously pushes it away to maintain a peaceful image. The brain learns that expressing negativity risks conflict or rejection, so it chooses silence instead. While this may protect social harmony in the short term, it prevents the emotion from being processed in a healthy way. When emotions are suppressed, they do not dissolve with time. Psychological research on emotional regulation confirms that unexpressed feelings remain active in the nervous system. The body still reacts as if the threat or injustice is present, releasing stress hormones like cortisol. This creates a constant low-level emotional pressure. The person may not think they are angry anymore, but their body and subconscious are still carrying the emotional charge. As this pattern continues, resentment begins to form. Resentment is not loud or dramatic, it grows quietly. Each ignored boundary, each swallowed insult, and each unmet need adds another layer. Because nice people often see themselves as kind and forgiving, they may not allow themselves to acknowledge resentment at all. This denial strengthens it. Psychology shows that emotions denied by the conscious mind gain influence in indirect and unhealthy ways. Over time, the suppressed emotions seek release. The brain can only contain emotional energy for so long before it looks for an outlet. This is why people who are consistently patient can suddenly react with intense anger over something small. The explosion feels shocking to others and even to the person themselves. But psychologically, the reaction is not sudden. It is the result of accumulated emotional pressure finally breaking through the surface. The darkness here is not aggression, but unprocessed emotion. Suppression teaches the mind to stay silent, not to heal. True emotional strength comes from acknowledging negative feelings early. understanding their source and responding consciously. When emotions are processed instead of buried, they lose their destructive power. When they are ignored, they grow in the shadows, waiting for the moment when politeness can no longer hold them back. When a person strongly identifies as nice or morally good, the brain builds a stable self-image around that identity. Psychology explains that the mind is deeply motivated to protect this image because it provides emotional safety and social value. Once someone believes I am a good person, that belief becomes a mental shield. Any action or thought that slightly contradicts it is quickly minimized, rationalized, or ignored, so the overall identity remains intact. This is where moral licensing begins. Studies in moral psychology show that after people do something they perceive as good, they subconsciously feel permitted to behave in less ethical ways afterward. The logic is rarely conscious. The mind quietly says, "I've already proven I'm good, so this doesn't define me." This allows dark thoughts, subtle cruelty, or dishonest behavior to slip through without triggering guilt, because the self-image absorbs the contradiction. Instead of obvious wrongdoing, moral licensing often shows up in socially acceptable forms. Passive aggression, silent treatment, emotional withdrawal, and subtle manipulation become tools that feel justified. The person does not see these actions as harmful because they are not openly aggressive. Psychology explains this as moral disengagement, where harmful behavior is reframed as deserved, harmless, or necessary, allowing the individual to maintain a sense of superiority while still causing emotional harm. What makes this darker is that the person often believes they are more ethical than others. This perceived moral high ground reduces self-reflection. Research shows that people who strongly identify as morally upright are sometimes less likely to question their own behavior. Because they know they are good, they stop monitoring themselves closely. This blind spot allows harmful patterns to continue unchecked, often hurting others while the person remains convinced of their own kindness. In reality, true psychological maturity comes from accepting moral imperfection. Everyone has selfish impulses, resentments, and unethical thoughts. When these are acknowledged, they can be regulated. When they are hidden behind a nice identity, they operate without awareness. The darkness here is not intentional evil, but unchecked justification. The moment someone stops seeing themselves as purely good, they gain the ability to act genuinely better. From an early age, many people are taught that jealousy is a shameful emotion. They learn that feeling envy makes them weak, ungrateful, or morally flawed. As a result, when envy arises naturally, as it does in all humans, the mind quickly suppresses it. Psychology explains this as emotional disapproval conditioning, where certain feelings are labeled unacceptable and pushed out of conscious awareness to preserve a positive self-image. However, envy does not disappear simply because it is denied. Psychological research shows that emotions ignored by the conscious mind continue operating in the subconscious. Envy is a comparison-based emotion, triggered when someone else has what we desire but lack. When this feeling is not acknowledged, the brain cannot process it constructively. Instead of motivating growth or self-reflection, the emotion becomes distorted and redirected. This redirection often takes subtle forms. Denied envy may appear as quiet criticism, where a nice person mentally downplays others' success. It may show up as a lack of support, delayed help, or emotional distance masked as politeness. In some cases, it turns into secret satisfaction when the envied person fails. Psychology refers to this as displaced emotional expression, where unacceptable feelings find indirect and socially safer outlets. Over time, this creates internal bitterness. The person may appear humble, modest, or selfless on the outside, but internally they feel overlooked, unfulfilled, or undervalued. Because they cannot admit envy, they also cannot confront the deeper issue beneath it, their own unmet desires, blocked ambitions, or suppressed needs. This gap between external humility and internal frustration slowly hardens into resentment. The darkness here is not cruelty toward others, but conflict within the self. Envy is not a moral failure, it is psychological information pointing to something the person wants or feels deprived of. When acknowledged honestly, it can guide growth and change. When denied in the name of niceness, it mutates into bitterness and quiet hostility. True emotional health comes not from pretending envy doesn't exist, but from understanding what it is trying to reveal. Fear is one of the strongest forces shaping human behavior, and in many nice people, it quietly sits at the center of their personality. Psychology shows that fear of rejection, abandonment, or conflict activates the brain's threat system, making social approval feel essential for survival. When a person believes that being liked keeps them safe, niceness becomes a defense mechanism rather than a genuine expression of care. Kindness in this case is not chosen freely, it is performed to avoid emotional danger. When fear drives behavior, authenticity slowly fades. The person learns to scan every situation for risk, asking themselves what reaction will keep others calm and satisfied. Over time, they stop asking what they truly feel or want. Psychology refers to this as self-silencing, a pattern where individuals suppress their inner voice to maintain relationships. The cost of this strategy is high. The person appears stable and agreeable, but their true emotional life is pushed into the background. The parts of the self that are considered unacceptable do not vanish. Anger, ambition, competitiveness, and selfish desires are normal human traits. But in fear-driven niceness, these traits are labeled dangerous. They are locked away because expressing them might lead to disapproval or conflict. Carl Jung described this rejected part of the personality as the shadow, the aspects of the self that are denied but still alive. The more these traits are suppressed, the more emotional energy they accumulate. As time passes, this internal split becomes harder to maintain. The shadow does not stay silent forever. Psychology shows that suppressed aspects of the self eventually seek expression, often in distorted or unhealthy ways. This can appear as sudden irritability, intrusive thoughts, secret fantasies of power or control, or passive-aggressive behavior. The person may feel confused or ashamed by these reactions, not realizing they are the voice of a self that has been ignored for too long. The darkness here is not the presence of these traits, but the fear-based rejection of them. True psychological health comes from integration, not suppression. When a person allows themselves to acknowledge anger without acting destructively, ambition without guilt, and selfish needs without shame, fear loses its grip. Niceness then becomes a choice rather than a shield. The shadow, once recognized, no longer needs to fight for attention from the dark. Denial is one of the mind's strongest defense mechanisms, and psychology shows it operates automatically to protect self-image. When people see themselves as kind, harmless, or morally good, acknowledging darker impulses feels threatening. The brain interprets this awareness as an attack on identity, so it rejects the information entirely. Thoughts like, "I'm not that kind of person," or "I would never do that," shut down self-examination before it can begin. This is not honesty, it is psychological self-protection. The problem is that denied traits do not lose power. Research in psychodynamic psychology and modern neuroscience both confirm that what is pushed out of conscious awareness continues to influence behavior from the subconscious. Aggression, selfishness, and cruelty do not disappear just because they are ignored. Instead, they operate indirectly, shaping tone, decisions, and reactions without being recognized. The person feels in control, but the behavior suggests otherwise. Denial hands control to the very impulses the person claims not to have. This is why denial makes darkness more dangerous, not less. When people are unaware of their own capacity for harm, they stop monitoring it. Psychology calls this lack of insight reduced self-regulation. A person who believes they are incapable of cruelty will not notice when they are being manipulative, dismissive, or emotionally harmful. Their actions feel justified because the internal narrative says, "I'm a good person." Awareness creates breaks, denial removes them. In contrast, self-aware individuals experience discomfort but gain control. Studies on emotional intelligence show that recognizing unwanted thoughts and impulses reduces the likelihood of acting on them. When someone admits, "I feel anger, I feel envy," or "I could hurt someone if I'm not careful," the conscious brain stays engaged. This awareness activates regulation systems that allow choice instead of reaction. Darkness acknowledged becomes something to manage, not something that secretly drives behavior. True goodness, psychologically speaking, is not innocence. It is responsibility. The people least likely to cause harm are not those who believe they have no dark side, but those who know exactly what they are capable of and choose restraint. Niceness without awareness is fragile and performative. Niceness with awareness is deliberate and stable. When darkness is faced directly, it loses its need to emerge through denial. And that is where real moral strength begins. So the truth is unsettling, but real. Darkness lives inside every nice person, not as a flaw, but as a human reality. The question isn't whether you have it, the question is whether you're brave enough to face it. Because the darkness you understand becomes power, and the darkness you deny becomes control.